Confirms that a number of Saudi nationals were detained for questioning following this attack. 3 people we know were killed when authorities say a Saudi Arabian man opened fire inside a classroom. Officials say the shooter was part of a military training program with other foreign troops. He was killed in a shootout with police. Now, officials are looking into whether the attack is terror-related. One of the victims, though, of this attack has been identified as Joshua Watson. Here he is here, a young sailor from Alabama. He's been described as a hero by those who knew him. Well, let's go to the Saudi capital. Nick Robertson is standing by with reaction from on this. Hi, Nick.
Yeah, hi there, Robin. Look, motive is going to be the key. The king here has told Saudi authorities to cooperate fully with U.S. investigators. That obviously goes for what's happening in Pensacola, Florida, but also it's an international investigation, and that goes for the Saudi authorities here, who will undoubtedly be cooperating with the FBI officials who are based in Saudi Arabia. What will they be looking at? All the normal things that law enforcement do look for after an attack like this. They will look at the social media activity of the person involved. They will try to talk to people close to him to find out what his mood was. Had he changed attitudes on anything recently? CNN has reached out to his family here, talked to an uncle. The uncle says, look, he was a high-achieving student, that he got on this, that he was in the military, and he got on this course. And I have to say, it is a prestigious course from a Saudi perspective to get this high-end military training in the United States. He was over 2 years into that course, and his uncle said, you know, there were no negative indications about him when he went on the course in the beginning, and nothing that he'd noticed about him in the intervening period. So this is going to be the focus, to try to figure out why this man went ahead and decided this yesterday morning to go and shoot a number of people on the base. And that, I think, is going to be, it's going to tell us a lot about how this develops from here. Is it going to put a big strain on the relationships between Saudi Arabia and the United States, between President Trump and the king, who's called him up to offer condolences and call this a barbaric act? Or is this something that will be sort of seen as a potential just one-off? We don't know at the moment.
No, we certainly don't know, but I mean, the perspective that you're getting there from Saudi, is there concern that this could be a terror attack? And what does that mean then?
Sure. I mean, for Saudi Arabia, the relationship with President Trump in particular, but the United States as well, because it's a massive military supplier. There are tensions in this region. Saudi Arabia looks to the United States for support, particularly on Iran. Right now, they like President Trump because he's tough on Iran. They were disappointed with President Obama because he didn't stick up for his allies and friends in the region. So the relationship between the king and President Trump, between the United States and Saudi Arabia, is an important one, and it goes both ways. Saudi Arabia was the location President Trump chose for his first international visit, and he trumpeted at that time the large amounts of weapon sales with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the world's now 3rd largest defense and security spender, and part of that means putting young military trainees through training in the United States to train on the weapon systems, on the helicopters, on the aircraft, on all the other weapon systems that Saudi Arabia buys. Just early last year, I was on a Black Hawk helicopter with Saudi pilots. It was parked at an airbase here with U.S. military Black Hawk helicopters, and from my perspective, there was no difference riding with the Saudi Air Force officers as it would have been riding with U.S. Air Force officers. Same aircraft, same procedures, same drills, just different countries. So that relationship is symbiotic for both countries, important for the United States projection of power in this region, but also for Saudi Arabia's security in the region, Robin.
Yeah, which is why this incident is going to be very closely scrutinized indeed. Nick Robertson in Riyadh, thanks so much for that update. Thank you. So to India now. A young woman has died after
fact that he was suffering from gunshot wounds. According to his brother, he was able to make it outside and tell first responders where that shooter was. That allowed them to go inside and ultimately take him down and possibly save countless lives, Candace. So those are just some of the tales of bravery that we're hearing coming out of Pensacola.
Yeah, newspapers across the world right now calling Joshua a hero. He was so young, 23 years old, I believe, his age. Have authorities determined at all what started this, or what could the possible motive have been behind all of this?
That's the question we keep asking, and that is what officials are not releasing right now. You know, the FBI has been very clear that this is going to be a long process. It's going to be a very deliberate, very intense investigation. And quite frankly, they're just at the beginning of that right now. And so they've made it clear they're going to speak to us and give us more information as they can, but they're not willing to release a motive as of right now. Now, we do know that they've had agents rather, on base, combing through what they're calling a very large crime scene for the better part of last night, overnight into today. It's something that's going to continue. To that point, the base is partially closed for the weekend. We know that essential personnel are allowed, people who live on the military base are allowed on, but otherwise it's very restricted access as investigators continue to look into this, Candace.
Blaine Alexander joining us from Pensacola, Florida, in the second military base shooting in a week. Unbelievable. Thank you. Well, trouble on the world stage. Coming up, that viral moment during President Trump's NATO visit and what it means for cooperation with our closest allies. And a deal with Iran leads to freedom for an American citizen. The new details on the prisoner swap that took place today.
When you take a line, you have the support of a probiotic.
The prisoner.
I want to hear this one more time. I didn't get all of it.
From gunshot wounds. According to his brother, he was able to make it outside and tell first responders where that shooter was. That allowed them to go inside and ultimately take him down and possibly save countless lives, Candace. So those are just some of the tales of bravery that we're hearing coming out of Pensacola.
Yeah, newspapers across the world right now calling Joshua a hero. He was so young, 23 years
Absolutely.
old, I believe. His age. Have authorities determined at all what started this, or what could the possible motive have been behind all of this?
That's the question we keep asking, and that is what officials are not releasing right now. You know, the FBI has been very clear that this is going to be a long process. It's going to be a very deliberate, very intense investigation. And quite frankly, they're just at the beginning of that right now. And so they've made it clear they're going to speak to us and give us more information as they can, but they're not willing to release a motive as of right now. Now, we do know that they've had agents rather, on base, combing through what they're calling a very large crime scene for the better part of last night, overnight into today. It's something that's going to continue. To that point, the base is partially closed for the weekend. We know that essential personnel are allowed, people who live on the military base are allowed on, but otherwise it's very restricted access as investigators continue to look into this, Candace.
Blaine Alexander joining us from Pensacola, Florida, in the second military base shooting in a week. Unbelievable.
The second military base shooting in less than a week. Right here on and at the anniversary of whenever Pearl Harbor was attacked. Is it just me, or am I adding too much into this pertaining to the dots adding up, lining up towards what this possibly may be evolving into?
Unbelievable. Thank you. Well, trouble on the world.
Let's fast forward it real quick. Skip through this, skip through this, skip through this.
Dentures may slip and fall. Fixodent Ultramax Hold gives you the strongest hold ever to lock your dentures. So
that
now
ain't
you
no
can
go
eat
no
tough
forever.
food without worry. Fixodent and forget it.
The journey has begun. It'll take us through the debate stages, along the trails of Iowa and New Hampshire, onward to the town halls and convention halls, into the spin rooms and ballrooms. And as this journey unfolds, we'll be on the ground, at the big board, navigating the twists and turns every step of the way.
breaking news right now. An American student imprisoned in Tehran for more than 3 years on suspicion of being a spy is now a free man. The 38-year-old Princeton University student will undergo a medical evaluation in Germany before flying back to the United States. In exchange, the U.S. freed an Iranian scientist who was arrested in Chicago last year for violating American trade sanctions against Iran. The Supreme Court has blocked a Trump administration request to resume federal executions that were slated for this Monday after a 16-year break. The justices upheld a lower court ruling in favor of 4 death row inmates who claimed executions by lethal injection would violate federal law. In a statement, conservative justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh indicated the Trump administration is likely to prevail and the lower court should decide the case within 60 days. Well, it didn't take long for Joe Biden's campaign to take advantage of that viral moment featuring world leaders making fun of President Trump at this week's NATO summit.
Several world leaders mocking President Trump.
They're laughing at him.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Allies are deeply worried about it. They say he's becoming increasingly isolated. Something is very wrong.
The world sees Trump for what he is: insincere, ill-informed, corrupt, dangerously incompetent, and incapable, in my view, of world leadership.
So where is our standing on the world stage? Joining me right now to break it all down is World News editor for the Daily Beast, Christopher Dickey. You may recognize the backdrop there. He's joining us from Paris. So Chris, Trump cut short his trip after just like 48 hours and sparred with allies throughout the trip. Was it a success? What sort of reaction are we getting from other world leaders as to how this NATO summit went?
Well, I think, Candace, if they're laughing to keep from crying, because they see Trump as an incredibly destructive force, one who's essentially adopted policies and positions, and particularly personal positions, that tremendously undermine the confidence of the North Atlantic Alliance that the United States can be relied on in a mutual defense treaty, and that it is in favor of a more united Europe and a more united NATO. In fact, they think that Trump would like to tear apart NATO, which he has often said is obsolete, notwithstanding his nice words about it during the London summit.
And do you get a sense that you had some 29 world leaders there, but there was one in particular who wasn't invited and wasn't there? And speaking of Vladimir Putin, did he play a major role into this week's... Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, there's a siren right outside the window. Yes, I can hear you.
I understand. It's a busy night there on the Champs-Elysees. How big of a role did Vladimir Putin play in this week's summit?
Well, I think, there's a big problem with NATO, which is, what is its raison d'etre? Why do we have a NATO? Why do we have a NATO? And it was easy in the old days to figure that out. I don't know if you can hear me over the police sirens, but it was easy in the old days to figure that out. As the first Secretary General of NATO said, its purpose was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and Germany down. Well, it's not clear that keeping the Russians out is really what NATO is supposed to do anymore. President Macron here in France has raised questions about that. Certainly, there have been a lot of questions raised about that by President Trump. So if it's not to keep the Russians out, what is it supposed to do? Is it supposed to go fight wars in Afghanistan, which it has done since 9/11, basically? Or is it supposed to act against China? Is it supposed to be dealing with cyber problems? President Macron says that it's supposed to be fighting terrorism. Well, that's good, but do you need an establishment, a defense establishment as enormous as NATO to fight terrorism? Well, I don't know. I don't think that's clear at all. And I think that this identity crisis of NATO is something that Trump has played on, and it is a tremendous problem for the organization.
All right, we'll leave it there. Christopher Dickey joining us from a very loud Arc de Triomphe on a Saturday night. Thank you. House Democrats hitting the gas on the impeachment process, with Nancy Pelosi telling the Judiciary Committee to draft the formal articles of impeachment when we could see a vote in the House and Could there be any factors that will slow the timeline down?
The first impeachment hearings in a generation are now underway. The story changes hourly. Another important day in this fast-paced impeachment inquiry. It's the 11th hour.
With just one touch, make healthy.
But again, just because one guy is jumping the wall or 10 guys, that doesn't mean that we stop trying to secure the border.
But actually, nobody's arguing. Hold on, nobody's arguing that it means you stop trying, but it might argue that what was done in building this wall isn't working.
Yeah, it's definitely working. I can tell you for a fact that we're not seeing groups of 10s, 20s of people jumping this wall. Let's think about it. Not everybody can climb that wall. Not everybody can rappel down that 30-foot wall. That's almost difficult. I can tell you that I would have a hard time climbing that wall. So in this case, one person did come across. I'm sure there's others that have tried and have been successful, but this wall is actually working, Leland.
So we have the idea that this part of the wall is working. As you look at the border, and obviously not everywhere either needs a wall or is it practical to build a wall, especially as you deal with some of the terrain out there, what percentage of the area that can be secured by a wall has been? How much more, shall we say, is needed?
So we've talked about maybe about a 50% of the entire southern border, and that those figures change depending on the tactics used by the smugglers. But let's talk about the wall in the RGV Valley. We have a section in the RGV sector in the Brownsville area that is a very secure part of the border. But then you compare that to places like Donna, Texas, where we don't have a wall, and that's where all the illegal entries are coming in. So the other thing is that these walls also show, Leland, is that once a group commits to coming to the United States and jump that wall, that's what they're going to do. Guess what? Now one of the strategies that they use is to run back to Mexico and get away. In this case, they're not going to be able to evade capture. And again, the technology worked. The manpower that was there, the detection technology, the fiber optic cable that we have in those areas, and a 30-foot wall is very good.
Real quick before we go, I want to ask you about the reports of this 16-year-old boy who died in custody. Tragic, no doubt. Nobody wants these kinds of things to happen. What has not changed, what still needs to change after we learned about deaths in custody, after we learned about minors in custody? What hasn't changed and who hasn't been held accountable that allowed this to happen again?
So one big difference right now that we have, Leland, is that now our numbers of apprehensions are actually down. When this death happened,
but if numbers are down, shouldn't there be even less of an excuse for somebody to die?
Yeah, but when this happened with this boy, we were being overwhelmed. We had a lot of people. We were over capacity. We could not send anybody to Health and Human Services. We couldn't send them to foster homes. We couldn't do any of that because there was no space available. Our Border Patrol agents had no choice but to house these people in our Border Patrol stations, which were not designed for long-term detention. Again, this is the result of Congress not acting and not giving us the proper facilities and the proper funding. Remember, we've been asking for funding for such a long time, and this falls squarely on the hands of Congress.
All right, well, we will take that issue to them, sir. Appreciate your time and your thoughts. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nathan.
Take care, sir. Kristen?
Well, Mayor Pete Buttigieg is out and about in Iowa today. He's just one of the...
Oh, it's free.
Call 1-800-854-2400.
Global efforts to protect them and other endangered.
It's the easiest way to keep my hair. And I can get my treatment without leaving the couch. Go to Keeps.
Well, that's going to do it for that. Good luck to my viewers. Good luck to all of us who are seeking a more crystal clear, divine, righteous lifestyle, not only here in America, but throughout the world.